Hey you guys, welcome back to RPO Restorations. Are you getting a code 45 on your check engine light? It has to do with a rich exhaust condition coming from your electronic Quadrajet or Dualjet carburetor. Well, if so, stay tuned because I'm going to run through some of the steps that you can use to diagnose this problem, narrow it down, and get it fixed. So we're going to go take a look under the hood, jump right in and get started, so stay tuned. All right, so what is a code 45? Code 45 for a rich exhaust condition tells us several things. Remember, these computers are just based on voltages and time. So it tells us that your ECM is seeing high voltage or higher than normal voltage from your oxygen sensor, I should say higher than what it should be, at a certain TPS value or throttle position sensor value over a certain amount of time, which in this case is 2 minutes, and the engine is operating in closed loop, so it's fully warmed up. So that's basically what your ECM is seeing and why it's setting a code 45. So now that we understand what your ECM sees that sets this, we could start to move through step by step and figure out what is causing this condition. All right, before we get going under the hood, real quick, a couple of disclaimers. One, I cannot do a step-by-step diagnosis procedure because, quite frankly, this car doesn't have that condition. And in order to do that, I would have to mess with the wiring and mess with the adjustment of the carburetor. And I just really don't want to go through all that. It would be way too time-consuming to get it set up right so that the test would return what I need them to return and then put it all back together. What I am going to do is show you the 4 steps that you should do that'll really narrow it down and help you figure out exactly what your problem is. But before we get started, there is one critical tool that you absolutely will need to do this, and that is a standard automotive dwell meter. We're going to be using it on the 6-cylinder scale in order to see what our mixture controlled solenoid is doing. It also wouldn't hurt if you had an OBD1 capable scan tool. Not just a code reader, but a tool that can actually read the engine data. If you don't, you can get by without one, but I would strongly recommend having one if you want to be servicing your car for the long term. All right, so without further ado, let's jump in and get started, see what's going on. Okay, now, first thing we need to talk about when you're diagnosing one of these problems, and this goes for basically any problem you can have with a trouble code on one of these cars. That is, you want to determine if the problem is intermittent or you're getting a hard fault. Intermittent means that the code comes and goes under certain driving conditions. The check engine light could come on, then turn off as you're changing the way you drive, part throttle, no throttle, idling, hot, cold, whatever the case may be. A hard fault means you start the car, it runs for a minute or two, then you have that light on no matter what you do, whether the car's idling, you're giving it full throttle, part throttle, cruising in traffic, whatever the case may be. So that's the first thing that you need to understand. If it's a hard fault, it's a little bit easier to diagnose than an intermittent problem. But the good thing about intermittent problems is they can almost always be an electrical wiring or sensor issue, which you can also narrow down and diagnose as well. There is one catch or one trick with the code 45 though. You will get an intermittent problem that is not an electrical issue, and it's probably one of the biggest reasons for a code 45, and we'll get to that in the end. But right now, let's go through the first couple of steps and narrow down what's wrong with our car. Hey, here we have our dwell meter. We're going to get ready to set that up first. You want to attach the dwell meter to the dwell lead, which is right here. This alligator clip will clamp onto it. The black part goes over to the battery. Let's go ahead and get that done, then we'll move on to step 2. All right, now that you've got your dwell meter hooked up, you're not done under the hood yet. Make sure you check all your vacuum lines for any cracks or broken lines. You might not be getting vacuum to the brakes or something that needs to open up. Make sure your choke is functioning correctly. That's a big one. After the car's been running for a minute or two, that choke should be fully open so you don't create a rich condition. Also, Now would be a good time to check your TPS voltage or your throttle position voltage with a scan tool. You want to make sure that's up to spec. That could create a false code 45 if it's set way too low. So having done all those things, now we have our dwell meter checked up. You want to get inside the car and we'll move on to step 2. All right, if everything under the hood is good, go ahead inside, turn the ignition on, ground your diagnostic terminal on your ALDL connector. You should hear your mixture control solenoid clicking for about 20 or 30 seconds. If you do not, stop right there. Your mixture control solenoid is stuck. I have seen this before, especially on cars that have sat a long time, or the mixture control solenoid hasn't been changed in the life of the car. These cars are 30, 35, 40 years old. Swap it out right now, because that could be the first reason you're getting a code 45. Okay, assuming your mixture control solenoid is good, go ahead and start the car up, let it idle, and get up to temperature. Once your car's at normal operating temperature and operating in closed loop mode, you want to take a look at your dwell meter. Remember, we're using the 6-cylinder scale. Doesn't matter what kind of engine or carburetor you have on your car. For reading mixture control solenoid information, you always use the 6-cylinder scale. You want to see a varying dwell. It should be varying somewhere around the 25, 30 mark. It should be moving slightly, a few degrees back and forth. If it's not, then you have an issue. If your dwell is fixed either too low and it's not moving at about the 10 degrees, then we'll look at that at another step. Same thing for if it's excessively high and hovering around the 50-degree mark. We'll take care of that in another step. Your dwell should be generally centered on the 30, and the dwell meter indicator should move back and forth a few degrees in each direction constantly at a smooth rate. If it's not, if it's, say, fixed at the 22 point or at the 35 point, and it's just slightly moving back and forth, you, my friend, have a misadjusted mixture control solenoid or idle air bleed valve. And I'll include a link up top and in the description to the carburetor calibration video where you can clear that up. But assuming that your mixture controlled solenoid dwell is fine, it's hovering right around the 30 mark, give or take a few degrees, nice and smooth back and forth, then we'll move on to the next step. All right, assuming everything is good so far, next step, you want to leave the car running, go ahead and yank out that PCV valve. This is going to create a really lean condition, and the engine computer and the carburetor should compensate for it. All right, you've yanked out that PCV valve. You got a lot of air coming into your motor. It's now running really lean. The engine computer should try and compensate for that, and your dwell on your dwell meter should drop. It should be well below 50 degrees, and the properly working mixture control solenoid will start to dump fuel and really lift those rods out of the jets to make up for that. So if it does, you want to double check to make sure there's no breaks or issues with the pink wire going to your mixture control solenoid. Make sure those wires are not reversed. The blue wire should be on the right, and the pink wire should be attached on the left side of the connector. Trust me, I've seen them mixed up over the years. It's something very easy to do, and with so many hands under the hood of these cars, they can get mixed up, so check that. Then you want to check for additional fuel getting in your motor, creating a rich condition. So you want to check your vapor canister, you want to look for fuel in the crankcase, or another emissions related component that could be putting an excessive amount of fuel in there. If all those components check out, then you have a carburetor calibration issue. So make sure you check previous videos on how to calibrate an electronic Quadrajet carburetor. because something in there, it's either your mixture control solenoid or your idle air bleed valve is out of whack. And if you clear that up, you should get rid of your code 45. So let's take a step back and say you've disconnected your PCV valve and your dwell is not under 50. It is hovering well over 50. The next step that you should take is to disconnect your oxygen sensor. Reconnect your PCV valve, take that single wire going to the oxygen sensor and ground it to the chassis. Now what that does is that tells the engine computer when your oxygen sensor is grounded that your vehicle is running really lean, and the mixture control solenoid and the computer should try to compensate for that. So you should see your dwell really drop. If it doesn't, or even if it does, what either of these things indicate, or whether you made it this far, is that you have an electrical problem. You have a problem in one of the circuits, either the oxygen sensor circuit might be shorting at a certain point, or some of the mixture control wires, or your ECM is having an electrical issue. So you're going to have to go down that road, try to figure out what's going on with that wiring. All right, so now you've ran through some of those diagnostic steps. If you still can't figure out what's wrong with your carburetor or why you're getting that code 45, it's more likely than not a calibration issue. Either your mixture control solenoid or your idle air bleed valve is misadjusted. Your TPS should be fine because we checked that in the very beginning of this video. But now I did promise to address a very specific type of intermittent problem with these carburetors, and I'm not even going to run through the diagnostic steps with it. I'm going to tell you exactly what's wrong. And that is a code 45 at highway speeds at par throttle that goes away when you take your foot off the gas for a few seconds. You're up to operating temperature, you're driving along the interstate, cruising at 60, 70 miles an hour. A couple minutes goes by, you get a check engine light that comes on, setting a code 45. You hit a little bit of traffic, or you have to slow down, maybe you have an exit coming up, you take your foot off the gas, you coast for a few seconds, or coast, then hit the brake, check engine light turns off. You resume driving, get back up to 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, check engine light comes on, and that process repeats itself. Without even running through the diagnostic steps, I can tell you with a fair degree of certainty, you, my friend, have a misadjusted mixture control solenoid. You're going to have to open the carburetor up and double check that adjustment, because I will guarantee you it's off. If your mixture control solenoid is misadjusted, the carburetor, when it goes into closed loop mode and the engine computer begins to take feedback from the oxygen sensor and adjust the air fuel mixture, the way that the solenoid is pressing against the rods and moving them up and down is already off, so the engine control computer cannot make the necessary adjustments. So I'll say with almost 100% certainty that is the issue. So if you're getting a code 45 at highway speeds, check your mixture control solenoid. All right, so that's it, guys. We ran through all the steps. Hopefully this video will be able to find some of you guys that are having this problem and help you out in getting rid of it, because I know having a check engine light on drives me absolutely crazy. Just make sure, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you're into these kind of cars, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we cover a lot of stuff on this channel. We'd love to have you be a part of it. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on the next one.